to share something with you. That might put me in a very negative light, yeah.
Relationships are not my forte.
See if someone grabbed up my wife or something completely different ballgame.
I'll walk away from here, and this has been like a therapy session.
This is Cook and Cassius for IFL TV, proudly sponsored by Everlast. It is Friday morning, afternoon even. How are you, first of all?
Right, I mean, I've probably never had so much abuse, but I've also never had so many nice messages from people checking in on me. I'm absolutely fine. It's been a rough 24, 48 hours, but it's just another day in the office, mate. And we've been in difficult situations before. Gutted because we should be at the weigh-in now for a fight that the numbers were just on another planet, the anticipation for the fight, and just big come down now of the fact that it's not happening. I'm gutted for everybody, you know, for the UK fight fans, fighters, undercard fighters, broadcasters, media. You know, we're all buzzing for a great fight, but it's life, isn't it? And on we go.
Let's track back to yesterday, Thursday, where there was a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of media, obviously, at the hotel, etc., waiting for the press conference to start. So when we found out, obviously, that it wasn't the case, that the fights were not going to go ahead, you called kind of, I call it a semi-press conference with you and Calla to make a statement. It was instructed that no questions were going to be asked from the media. So can you just talk me through that? Why that was?
It wasn't really instructed. I mean, I don't mind. I think I've got a decent reputation of answering questions. You lot were like vultures, right? Which is understandable because it's your job. But when I walked into the hotel, it was like you saw how many people were there, media-wise. I mean, half the people there have never been to a boxing press conference in the last 6 months. So everybody's there. I spoke to, you know, our media guys, media agencies, and they just basically said, Ed, you've either got to do like everyone. I couldn't have just peeled off and done you. Agreed?
No, I agree that. I meant for everyone there.
From the writer's point of view, like, and also there was so much speculation and untruths yesterday in terms of like we were in court as we speak, you know, like we were, Matchroom were ready to get another commission to do it. And I went back to a few journalists during the day, but it's difficult to stay on top of it. So for me, you know, the general advice was, look, and also don't forget that here you have a young fighter, young man, who has to go through a process to let his situation be heard. And there is a lot of people in this situation, and I get it, we've been here before plenty of times, that will automatically find someone guilty without giving him the opportunity to be heard. And a lot of what is said can affect that process. So we do have to be a little bit careful. I mean, you know, I remember the entire media section, fighters, fans, everybody found Dillian Whyte guilty during that process. That was a more difficult process than this, because it was another agency, it was different, there was a confidentiality agreement in place with the agency, that's the process, not ours. But this was different. This was something that was shared between everybody, and the important people in this situation knew from the get-go. So, but that situation we've been through before, and the entire world found Dillian Whyte guilty. Only when the truth came out was he not. And no one's kind of apologised and said, oh, actually, mate, sorry about that. They just went, oh, yeah, is he all right? Nice one, we'll just move on. So all I'm saying is let that situation play out. So I'm here. Like, I'm not going on holiday. I'm sitting down with you, and people will moan that I'm sitting down with you because they'll think that me and you have come up with like our individual questions. But at the end of the day, you are, unfortunately, one of the biggest outlets. It's not because I like you, because I don't. But I do you instead of doing 30 other YouTube outlets, of which I love and respect them all. But I can't, you know, like, this has been quite an arduous, like, few days. Really, at some point, after doing every outlet for 3 or 4 hours a day, like you have to say to yourself, I'm going to make my statement. And we could have just put a release out, to be honest with you, press release, and said, sorry guys, we're not attending, but, you know.
Okay, well, appreciate your time as always, Eddie.
Be careful what you ask me.
Yeah. Okay, look, I do appreciate that certain things I will ask you that you probably are not allowed to speak about as well, but I'll ask him anyway. You can kind of run me through it anyway. Eddie, what's been kind of the explanation of this situation from, I'll say CONOR BENN, but also Team BENN regarding like what's happened with this test?
Well, firstly, you have a young fighter who obviously protests he's complete innocent in the situation. And that process is to be dealt with by CONOR BENN. He's got a very tricky time coming up, as I said. Eventually, people will be able to make their own decisions and everything. I feel like, because I've been here before in situations, you should let the information come out. I know CONOR BENN very well. Tony Sims, who he virtually lives with, but like they're like that, is, you know, one of the best men in boxing, and it's difficult for him. But, you know, there's a process that's going to have to be undertook now, because people, as we've seen from the situation, and rightfully so, will want to know an explanation or a resolution or how we move forward. And that's when we talk about the British Boxing Board of Control with VADA. The British Boxing, you know, CONOR BENN is not suspended. So, and under their rules, as we saw with Billy Joe Saunders, they can't and won't suspend him. So, but clearly, so when can he box? And the answer is when a process has taken place, of which there isn't actually a process to take place, but one needs to take place. And this is the conflict between agencies and who acknowledges which agency, of which we'll talk about, because I think it's important for people to understand the difference between a UKAD agency, which is the British Boxing Board of Control's commission agency, and VADA, who we pay for. And not many people do, but we spend more money with VADA on more fights than any other promotional company. And I've seen, like, you know, the old famous posts going back of me 3 or 4 years ago. When I say the British Boxing Board of Control do not recognise VADA, that's just fact. It's got nothing to do with the quality of VADA. Do you think we'd spend, I don't know what we spend, hundreds and hundreds of thousands a year on an independent agency if we didn't think that they were qualified or, you know. So from there, we will continue to use VADA. And VADA is, in our instances, for a lot of those fights, a testing process that is agreed between the parties. So in this instance, it's Matchroom and Wasserman have paid the money to make sure, and at the request of both fighters, by the way, that there's VADA testing in process for this fight. It's additional testing above and beyond the commission testing. So both Chris EUBANK Jr. and CONOR BENN have UKAD testing in place as a British Boxing Board of Control fighter and have been tested multiple times, you know, in the run-up to this fight. But we also paid, as part of the promotion and at the request of the fighter, additional testing for this bout. Not we did it and then didn't tell the guys. The fighters requested, along with us, as we do for all our big championship fights particularly, and it's very expensive, that additional testing was in place.
Okay, so with VADA, obviously you made the point there that the board doesn't recognise VADA, they're with UKAD. So why can't you make a decision based on VADA testing if it's coming back as a negative test yourself?
Yeah, we can. It goes to the parties. So in this instance, when the parties sign up to VADA testing, every result comes back via email, positive or negative, to all parties involved. So when people say about this test was covered up, this test was never covered up. The test came through as a positive test, an adverse analytical finding. And then, on the same email, is Robert Smith from the British Boxing Board of Control, Matchroom and Team BENN, Callis Allen and Team Wasserman, Team EUBANK. Right? So, firstly, you know, and different agencies had different policies in place. UKAD's testing is completely confidential. You cannot share that information under UKAD. So separate information with Dillian White, for example. In VADA, it's an independent testing process where the parties that have signed up get full reporting. VADA is a reporting agency. It doesn't deal with fine processes, violations, etc. It reports. So in that situation, the information goes to the British Boxing Board of Control. Now, the process from there was that comes through, obviously, Calisal and Wasserman straight on the phone to say, what's going on here? The conversation with Team Ben, everybody's up in arms, what the fuck's going on here? Then you request additional information of just the testing, you know, sometimes you can ask for the levels, etc., which takes time to come from the agency or the testing lab. The British Boxing Board of Control, Robert Smith, come on, and again, I see everyone's going to accuse everybody of how they feel this played out. The board at this point received the information of this test with VADA. Now, because this is a private agreement between the fighters ultimately, and the board, this is what I'm saying about the way they acknowledge UCAD, they can't just say, okay, well, you guys deal with it. And that was a process where they had to request information, find out what was going on. And it was a difficult decision for the board because in the instance of Precedent and Billy Joe Saunders, where he failed a VADA test, the board said, we do not, this is a quote from the board, we do not acknowledge VADA and he will not be suspended because he has passed his UCAD test. So from there, you've got a situation where it's very unclear. From there, Team Wasserman, Calisal and EUBANK, etc., want to look into it themselves. They get the information, they get the reports, they go back to their doctor, they look at everything. CONOR BENN speaks to Chris EUBANK, and I saw a load of stuff saying he never spoke to him. What Chris Lloyd said to him, have you spoken to CONOR BENN since this came out, or this news came out from the board? The answer was no. CONOR BENN spoke to Chris EUBANK Jr. previously when this VADA test came out. Yes, not when the board made their statement. And I've seen various comments on that. And Calla also said that they spoke. It was decided that they were happy to continue with the bout. Okay? The board were also aware that they were happy to continue for the bout, but more information was coming out. Everybody wanted to keep on looking into this. And eventually the board came back because they can't suspend CONOR BENN and said it's not in the best interest of the sport. Okay? On the Wednesday before the fight when the work had been done. From there, obviously, the situation was quite bullish in terms of, hang on, like you've known about this information, you say you don't acknowledge VADA, the fighter on the opposite team has spoken to the fighter individually, he's looked into it with his medical experts, he's happy for it to go ahead. Couple that with the media attention and various things going backwards and forwards, we have a decision at that point to say, and by the way, the board hadn't sanctioned the fight through this process. So although it was a strange move to wait that period of time and make a decision at that point, you know, there was still discussions ongoing. And at that point, we are faced with a situation of actually the board's decision can be legally challenged and we will win based on precedent, based on the board rules, or we have a decision to use a different commission, right, which is the easiest thing to do. We could have gone ahead with this fight with 3 or 4 commissions that were willing to stage this fight. In reference to that position, which I saw various outlets saying we were prepared, we were never prepared to move forward with an outside commission for this fight. My fights take place under the British Boxing Board of Control, our governing body, and that will be the case. So that was never, ever in play moving forward. That would have been the easiest thing for us to do. And you go back to when David Hay boxed Derek Chisora and Frank Warren used another commission because they wouldn't sanction the bout. I was not going to do that. And we did not appear in court, as I read somewhere as well, apparently. We looked at it, we spoke to our lawyers. Our lawyers said to us, we believe you will win an arbitration to move forward with this fight. And it was decided not to, ultimately. Whatever way you want to look at it, the fight was pulled by us, the parties, Matchroom, Wasserman. We made the decision to pull it and not move forward and win this case in court, not move forward and do it with another commission. And that was the right decision, in my opinion. And it's not a case of, oh yeah, but you tried. No, we spoke to everybody involved, and there was a feeling amongst everybody to move forward with the bout, subject to more information coming out and the board being happy with their position. So that's where we're at with it.
There was a perception that the reason why there was a statement from the board was because of the newspaper report from the Daily Mail.
No. Actually, the board had already written to us to say that the fight would not be sanctioned, previously to that. They're talking about, I think it might have been the morning or whatever. Riyadh put a statement out after, and then eventually, once that statement went out from Riyadh, they publicly put the statement out that they'd previously sent to us. So that is not the case. We already knew before that article dropped in the Daily Mail that the board had said, we're not prepared to sanction this fight because we do not feel like it's the best interest of boxing. When it went out, and there's been a lot of people saying that, again, that's another conversation to see what happened in this process. The two were linked, but who knows? I've seen a lot of people with a lot of opinions. And by the way, when I say, I saw a quote from me today, there's a lot of righteous people who are giving opinions. It doesn't mean that the opinion of this fight shouldn't have taken place is wrong. It just means that I've heard opinions from people that in the same situation would have done exactly the same thing of certain people. And when I see people from, Sky particularly, who are, I read it and I look back to the Dillian White situation and how they were involved in that process as well. And anyway, that's one for another story, but it baffles me. It's a very difficult process to be a part of, that you have to take your time, you have to gather the information, and you have to make the right decision. And I believe the right decision was made. The way that it was handled and the fact that CONOR BENN wasn't allowed due process is wrong, and that will be dealt with, but ultimately the right decision was made.
Eddie, are you saying to me, had that story from the Daily Mail not come out on Wednesday, that you would have found yourself in the same situation regarding the fight on the board?
Exactly, because the decision had already been made prior to the article. The article, and Riyadh's a great journalist. This is his bread and butter. He loves this stuff. But the decision was made before the article. The article, what the article did was made it aware to the wider people who didn't have all the facts, who had already made their mind up about what to do. And did it help our decision? I would say, honestly, yeah, I think it did. Because in that situation, you see the response and you go, this is the right thing to do. You've got to think on your feet in that situation. And we were quite bullish. Calla was very bullish that he's spoken to EUBANK, he's got all the medical information, they're happy to proceed with the fight. And that, for me, is the most important thing when you're talking about, people being aware of the situation. This was all the important parties were aware of this situation and a decision was made.
Eddie, I want to move on to the undercard of this fight. So, first of all, was it ever considered that you would run with the whole card minus Benn and EUBANK, which I'm assuming would have been a bit of a nightmare to have worked out from all different aspects? And what happens in regards to kind of, those 16 fighters? Is there anything in place for compensation in terms of them not fighting because of this situation regarding CONOR BENN? Yeah,
so firstly, I think we've got a pretty good track record of keeping fights on and keeping shows on. We just give you one example of about 2 weeks ago when Lee Wood and Maurizio Lara fell off the card. We kept that show ahead. Luckily, we had a couple of weeks there to actually put a plan in place in an arena where ultimately you're going to get a lot of refunds. The difference with this is the ticket prices in place were there because of the value of the EUBANK Benn fight. So normally when you get a great card, and for example, the recent one in Nottingham, when Lee Wood comes off the card, although that's a blow to the card, you turn around and you say you've got the choice of a full refund or you can keep your ticket. Also, a lot of fighters had sold individual tickets for that card. Fighters were not given a huge amount of tickets for EUBANK against Benn because we wanted to make it available to everybody at the box office. Okay, so in this instance, you cannot charge the ticket money for EUBANK Ben to watch the other fights on the card. Good undercard, Galal Yafai, Felix Cash. But can you imagine someone who's paid ringside money for EUBANK Ben and me saying, no, you can't have a refund? Or even me saying, you can still pay, but it's the same price to watch this as it was. It's two completely different things. Therefore, your only option is to offer everybody a refund. And by the way, you cannot win in this situation, okay? So, but to the members of the British public, it's a complete 100% refund. Now, from there, you can say, or you can keep your ticket and watch the undercard and try and move forward. With all due respect, 99% of those people would be ordering an immediate refund. Okay? So you're then left with an empty arena. What you can't do with 48 hours to do is to go back on sale. Okay? You could, I guess, not have a crowd, or I don't know. But also, we've got to think about the situation of one of the biggest British boxing fights that of recent times has fallen through, and all of a sudden we go back to the O2 in an empty O2 with a card of fighters that have been expected to fight on EUBANK Ben, etc., etc. So the decision was made. Logistically, it's virtually impossible to do the card. Okay, so what we do is from there, obviously Wasserman had their fights, we had our fights. I think we had 4 fights on the card, 5 fights, Matchroom. And they were Galal Yafai, they were Shannon Courtney, Ellie Scottney, and Felix Cash. 4 fights. And George Liddard making his debut in a 4-rounder. Okay? So you sit down with your team and you say, when can you get these fighters out? I'm talking ASAP. Because it's not their fault. It's not our fault. But unfortunately, it's life. And it's not the first time a show's been cancelled. But they need to get paid. But more importantly, they need to progress with their career. Especially someone like Felix Cash, who pulled out of the fight on the day of the fight, if you remember, in July, because he was ill, rescheduled to this. He's probably thinking, what is going on with, like, how unlucky am I? So all day today and all of last night, we go through the cards to slot those fighters on the first available card. The difficulty with that is all of the upcoming cards are all full. Okay? So, for instance, October 29th at Wembley, Katie Taylor card, completely full. From 5 o'clock when doors open till 11:30 at night, no space on the card. So from there, you say, look, some of these fights or one of these fights has to go on that card. So just to give you an example of what you go through, then we speak to Wembley. Can we bring the doors opening earlier? Can we take the curfew half an hour later, just so we can get Felix Cash on or Ellie Scottney on? Week after, Abu Dhabi. Who can go on there? The answer is Galal Yafai will be on in Abu Dhabi. So then you go back to Galal Yafai and go, great news, in 4 weeks' time, you're on Abu Dhabi, etc., etc. Shannon Courtney, when's she going to fight? You know, we spoke to her at length today. They speak to their team, they speak to their training team. Look, rather than go again in 2 weeks after, you're going to rehydrate and you've been training for a long time, when do you want to go? Do you want to go November? Do you want to go December? Most people on that card will only be fighting once this year. Actually, all of those names that I've mentioned. Maybe, probably now. So the main 4 championship fights, Shannon Courtney, which we will announce her date in due course. We've agreed with her the best process for that now. Ellie Scottney, who will go on October 29th in 3 weeks' time at Wembley. She's very happy with the situation. Felix Cash will either go October 29 or Abu Dhabi. And Galal Yafai will go Abu Dhabi. So from our point of view, we've managed to get all of those fighters out in the pretty immediate future and make sure everyone's happy. It's a disaster situation. There's no good or bad out of it. But the most important thing is the delay is not too long for them to fight.
Is it a case of then everyone loses money across the board then? Because obviously those fighters have obviously spent money in camps, etc.
Look, unfortunately, fights fall through. Sometimes they get injured. Sometimes a show falls through. They are going to have an additional 2 weeks of camp, some of those guys, for this fight. And we will speak to many of them regarding their financial situation coming up to that, and make sure that everyone's in a good position. But I'm pretty happy, and I think they are as well, with a situation where they can box 3 weeks later on a really big card. And that's the most important thing, because when you make a decision like that, the first thing you think about is the undercard fighters, and it's like, but like the whole thing was a nightmare. So the most important thing is to give them the news this morning to say, great news. This is your date, back to the gym, let's go to work, and on we go. And I think, I gave Galal Yafai the news personally. He's very happy. His brother's also on in Abu Dhabi, so he's pleased to fight out there. Ellie Scottney was over the moon. She actually said, whatever people say about you, you're actually half all right. I said, thanks very much for that. So everyone's taken care of. So again, I don't really expect to get the credit, but trust me when I say that 9 times out of 10, you might not even fought this year in this kind of situation. So I think everyone's happy with how we've resolved it and how quickly we've done it.
Just coming back to when you were talking about the fans and the tickets, etc., and that was obviously what you said about you offering a full refund. That was the only kind of process. But in terms of should there be a procedure? I know there really isn't, but should there be a procedure of people kind of travelling if they've booked hotels, and people spend money for a fight like this? They spend money. Should there be something in place for that?
Pay for the hotels and travel.
But
I mean, I'm really you just can't do that as an event promoter. I mean, there's so many events get cancelled for various reasons. I mean, a lot of people have travel insurance around bookings and stuff like that. But again, and there's no point me saying we've done hundreds of thousands of pounds on this show because people couldn't give a fuck how much money I've lost, in all honesty, and maybe rightfully so. But this is something that has affected everybody involved. Like, you've spent money on this show, right? Obviously, we've done our conkers on this show. Chris Eubank has trained for. I think people should feel more sorry probably at the moment, although his stock's risen incredibly because I thought he'd been fantastic in his promotion. Chris Eubank's waiting on a fight date. He's the only one who ain't got a fight date really, who's been on the show. So there's no you can't take care of. I can't start going through my DMs with some bloke booked a hotel at the O2 Holiday Inn and phone him up and cover his night. It's just I'm genuinely sorry. I'm gutted. No one wanted this fight. I mean, when this news broke from the Daily Mail, obviously everyone says, you've got to pull the show. You've got to pull the show. We pulled the show. I had so many people going, what'd you pull the show for? I was looking forward to that fight. It's like, hang on a minute. The right decision was made in the end. And that's what matters. But all you can do is continue to try and do the right thing. And that goes back to the undercard fights. Again, you lose money from hotels, flights, venue hire, VADA testing, boards, sanction fees, other flights. No one really cares, but it's a very, very expensive process when a fight of this magnitude, launch party on Monday, media workout, press conference, weigh-ins, all these things, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds. But that's the game we're in. And boxing is the worst business in the world. The worst business in the world. But I've been doing it for 13 years, 14 years, and it's a massive part of my life. I'd like to think I've made a positive contribution to the sport with my efforts, and I'll continue to do so because I love the game and the sport.
What is the process now over the next days and weeks? I saw a few people speculating that you could put this on abroad, in a few weeks.
Put it on tomorrow. Could put this fight on tomorrow, next week, the week after that. Could have put it on at the O2 on Saturday. But to put this fight on next week, we'll be in the same position. So that's not going to happen. What we've got to do is move at speed here. And we want answers from various different people, but we want a procedural answer from the people who ultimately wouldn't sanction this fight as well, to say, okay, get it, we listen to what you say, what's now? Because, from Conor Benn's side, the work around the clock, and it has been going on, and now is going on a turbo drive to deal with this situation, which he'll meet head on, by the way. So, and that's his process that he's going to go through now. And from now, we need to speed that process up. Because I want to make this fight, but I want to make the fight at the right time. Now, that right time is, I don't know, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months, a year. That will be determined by what comes out over the coming days and weeks, because, you know, there has to be a strategy and a plan, and he'll want his case to be heard and his situation to be heard. The problem is because of the fact that this was testing implemented by the parties, i.e. us and Wasserman, and the process is unclear in terms of its next steps, because the board don't recognise VADA testing. If it was a UCAD case, there would be a UCAD hearing, and that procedure is papered and it's within their rules. So, but at the same time, over to them. But, you know, we need to know that process, and unfortunately there is no rules and regulations of how this process plays out. Thus, the time of talking to everybody, because that process is unclear.
Eddie, I mean, when you talk about VADA and UCAD, isn't it an issue that there are such contrasting criteria on both sides, that if you're using UCAD, which you have to with the board, you're using VADA, but they've got very kind of different, even from the substances that's on lists, etc. Isn't that an issue in itself?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, you know, when you go back to that clip of me saying, what's the point in using VADA? The point of using VADA is additional testing above and beyond the Commission's testing, and to make sure that everybody is aware of those results. We've been doing VADA testing for years. Every single AJ fight, every one of our Canelo Alvarez fights, every one of our major fights. We know how it works. You, as a team of someone that represents your fighter, gets the opportunity to be part of that program, to witness the process and the results. Okay? So from there, the discussions take place. The teams analyse the testing, as we had in this instance. They get their own medical advice around the situation. And Team Wasserman, Team EUBANK, happy to proceed with the bout. So when people say, what is the point of VADA testing? VADA testing has played its role here. Of course it has, because we implemented it. And if we didn't implement VADA testing and pay the money to have additional testing for this bout would have taken place. Because guess what? All of CONOR Benn's UCAD tests were negative. And that is the testing commission, the testing agency for the commission of use in this fight, our commission. So the fact that the people out there that will talk about testing in sport, I guess they're happy because of the money that we've paid and the willingness of us, the fighters, to have additional testing for the bout. This has come out. But if there was just a normal promotion and UCAD were doing their testing, it hasn't. So in answer to your question, absolutely, because now the answers have got to be found around all the testing protocol, of which there are many tests over this period. Why has that happened? And talk about the levels, and I'm not a scientist, but that will all come out now. And all this different stuff, analysing this. People talk about the B sample a lot. And we all know, I've seen it, I mean, the B sample is generally the same as the A sample. Correct. And perhaps that's the same, but we have to look at all the tests across the board and find out why this test has come back negative. And again, this is something particularly in the Dillian White case. A lot of those tests give you a clearer picture as to information you may require to make a judgment on this.
Yeah, I see a lot of people always mentioning, especially in this situation and around the Dillian White situation, in reference to the B sample. Can you just explain that it is the same sample that's put into two different pots, basically?
When you talk about contamination, and that's a potential issue around all testing, particularly in Dillian White's case. But if a sample is in some way contaminated when it's tested, there is a chance that the B sample would not be contaminated because it's tested separately to that particular sample. Everyone's right when they say 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10, the B sample would come back positive. And that is the case. That doesn't mean there isn't another reason why a fighter has tested positive, but that's a process. Again, because of what's gone on in terms of how these things have been tested, you must have in this situation, because of the importance of your career, representation to open that testing. Do you understand what I'm saying? So you send someone to the lab, a scientist, to make sure that that process is overlooked. And again, that will all come out when you hear the information around this case. But I'm not sitting here going, well, the B sample's not, because 9.9 times out of 10 it would be. So, but that's an issue for CONOR BENN, and obviously all the process that's taken place around this.
So in this situation as well, I mean, who has the power to, if they felt it was right, to suspend or give CONOR BENN a ban, if they felt that that was the right thing to do regarding on whatever?
Honestly, technically, and under the rules and precedents, I mean, not the British Boxing Board of Control, and he's not licensed elsewhere. Now, in a certain commission, maybe many, I mean, again, sorry to use the Billy Joe Saunders example. Billy Joe Saunders failed a VADA test, okay? He had a hearing with the Massachusetts Commission, who decided they would not give him a license because of that test. That was then taken back to the British Boxing Board of Control, that information, who said, we do not acknowledge VADA, and therefore we will not be suspending Billy Joe Saunders, okay? So, what I'm saying is, if CONOR BENN now wanted to fight in Massachusetts or in New York or in Las Vegas, the commission there, when he applies for his license, would review various medical information, of which this would be one thing, and until a hearing takes place or until further information is furnished, may not issue him a license. He already has a license with the British Boxing Board of Control. They chose not to suspend CONOR BENN. So almost, you know, and under their rules, they actually can't, but we need to know what they're going to do about it. So again, this is a process that will play out now. But in answer to your question, right now, technically, and this is why we could have won this case, and this is why we could have proceeded in this fashion on Saturday night, ultimately, because of rules and precedents, and the fact that this was, all his UCAD tests were clear, the British Boxing Board of Control chose not to suspend CONOR BENN. Therefore, technically, he can fight. They chose not to sanction this bout. So we could have put him on next Saturday at the moment, and they'd be asked to sanction that bout. Now, they might say no again, but you can't, the process has to be clearer than that. It just can't be, well, it'll be bout by bout. There's got to be a process, and I honestly don't know what that is.
Is it a case now of first steps is for CONOR BENN and to resolve this situation, clear his name? He's insistent that he's done nothing wrong, so if that's the case, that needs to be done first, again, before anything else.
On the accusation of any wrongdoing or any crime, people will want the ability to fight their case and let the information come out, and we should give them that. 99% of people have made their own decision already, just like they did with Dillian White. Let it all play out. We need to get in front of the British Boxing Board. I mean, there's a lot legally going on with the board right now, and Conor's got his hands full on his team. Let's find, are you suspending him? I mean, again, it's a very unique situation of where there is no pathway. And that's why people will look at it and say, well, what happened in the 10 days or whatever whilst all the parties were talking? Generally, a lot of uncertainty and information and discussions. And those discussions will carry on because there is no pathway in this incident and with what's happened.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, it's been a whirlwind 24 hours, 48 hours, yeah. But I suppose a couple of weeks for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a brutal 48 hours. I mean, we had the Fury stuff before then, and, I've never seen so many people talking about boxing. I go out up the road, just went out to Tesco's to get a soup, and I must have talked to about 20 people about AJ, about CONOR BENN, about this and that, and you always want boxing to be reflected in the best light possible, and it ain't been a great 48 hours in that respect. So, again, been through many situations in the past, some very similar to this as well, and you ride out the storm and keep grafting away. We go to Australia next week for our first show in Australia, then we get on the plane, and then we go to Mexico for Maurizio Lara in Mexico City, and then we fly back to London, and we do the big Katie Taylor show at Wembley, and then we fly to Abu Dhabi for a huge card there with Bivol Ramirez and McCaskill against Cameron and other world title fights as well. And then we go to Cleveland, and it's non-stop for the next 4 or 5 weeks. But that's all you can do. Keep your nut down and keep grafting. Ride the storms, baby.
Don't know how long we're done, but we've not even mentioned anything else.
What is the time, by the way?
Don't know.
Right, I've got to go soon.
All right, 2 secs. So, AJ, what's the situation regarding him? We're assuming, obviously, now this is all dead in the water with the Fury.
I mean, it seems like a lifetime away now. I've seen so much stuff going backwards and forwards. After Tyson Fury publicly, for the second time, said there is no way I'm fighting Tyson Fury, we haven't heard. I think the day after, the evening, there was a couple of conversations. I haven't spoken to George Warren since then. Again, they never come back to us. Like, at the end of the day, publicly, Tyson Fury pulled out the fight twice and said, I'm not fighting Anthony Joshua. So he's fighting December 3rd, I think, Manuel Charr or Derek Chisora. And we're talking to AJ about, do we go December 17th? And that's been the plan. If we didn't fight Tyson Fury, because that was always the date that we preferred. So we'll have to see where that unfolds.
So there's a possibility he may not fight this year. Is that an option?
I mean, again, you know, he's in camp. He was in camp to fight Tyson Fury. So I don't necessarily think that's the preferred option, but it's a bit of a kick in the nuts that he's not fighting Tyson Fury because that's what he wanted to do. So we'll have to see.
Is there any movement on the situation regarding Dillian Whyte when he can fight next?
Yeah, looking to get Dillian out, obviously end of November, and finalising that now, and hopefully have some news for you on that next week.
We'll look forward to it. Well, listen, appreciate your time. I don't really know what to say to end it, but just we'll see what happens. But I suppose this is going to be a day-to-day thing. It's going to change.
There's plenty of legs left in this one, mate. Plenty of drama, and you know, I hope at the right time, in the right circumstances, we can get a fight that was just going to be absolutely huge. But we will see.
Eddie Hearn, thank you very much for talking to IFL TV.
I'm going to share something with you that might put me in a very negative light, yeah.
Relationships are not my forte.
See if someone grabbed up my wife and saying completely different ballgame.
I'll walk away from here, and this has been like a therapy session.